Welcome back. Innovation is often used interchangeably with the use of technology or research, and these are confused with the whole concept of innovation. But then, experts will tell you that innovation means continuous improvement or introduction of product or processes which may give an individual or company organization a competitive edge or better efficiencies. I'm joined by two experts in the field to share with me their thoughts on how we can improve in the running of things or our businesses and thereby help give the country that competitive advantage that we need in this complex and challenging world. My guests are Andries Wilken, who is the CEO of Effortless. Welcome, Andries. And Davis Cook, CEO of Research Institute for Innovation and Sustainability, or RIS. Davis.
Thank you.
Good evening to you. Welcome. Now, gentlemen, innovation, let me start with the meaning of the word because we confuse it. What does it mean to you?
So for me, firstly, I come from a product development environment, so we used to use it to develop products. But nowadays, with diversity being the number one thing that I strive on, as we're saying, is innovation is whatever you take from good to great. So whatever you can do, whether it's a social innovation, whether it's products, whether it's people, whether it's just looking new at a theme, that for me is innovation, and you need to turn that into money.
And Davis?
So Tim, thanks. I agree with Andries. I think innovation for us is around how do you take something the way that we currently do it and you make it better. You find ways to improve problem solving. The way we deliver things becomes better, more efficient in any sphere of our life.
Well, give me a practical example then of that.
Okay, so Uber has been a very, very common thing lately.
Yeah.
2 years ago, we would just try and hail a taxi on the side of the road,
Yes.
or we would call a taxi cab. Now we have an app that does that. They didn't necessarily invent new technology, but they used technology in a different way that made many of our lives easier. That's a really simple example.
In fact, it's a good case. Study that now, because I would think vehicles and the use of the taxi as that, but it is just the introduction of an app that made a difference, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And the size of the company is huge.
Yeah, it's $50 billion.
$50 billion from something that is so commonplace these days. Everybody talks about app. The development of one app created a $50 billion business.
Absolutely. And I think that the key there is not necessarily they didn't invent a new device or a new thing.
Yes.
Apps have been around for many years.
Yes.
They just found a new way of applying that.
Connecting apps to
Absolutely.
the taxi industry, and it changed everything. And I suppose it's the same with, let's say, banking, internet banking, that type of thing. But now, the process of innovating, is it something that you do consciously, or is it something that happens by itself?
I think if you're stuck in the product development rut, there is a forceful way that you need to go through. A classic example, I worked with a company in the beginning of the year. Their mandate was for their customer, let's build a university. So typical engineering fashion, you will say, okay, you need a university this big, this many lecture rooms. Through the innovation process, we asked, do we need a university, or is it actually something else we need?
Yes.
So we went back to the voice of the customer, went to the community, and at the end of the day, there wasn't actually need for a university in this area. There was actually needed for a technical college or a skills development college, and not a university. So that's the difference between innovation and product development. Innovation starts with what is the actual problem.
Okay, and I will come with raise a point about one of the very public issues in South Africa at the moment. But for an individual, let's say, is it something, innovation as a concept that you can apply in your personal life, for instance?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there are structured ways of doing things, but ultimately innovation is around being curious. And you can be curious about everything in your life, whether it's work or play or kids or family. And as soon as you go out and ask yourself, why do I do it this way? Why don't I change it and become better? And that's equally applicable in our personal lives, in our relationships, as it is in our working environment.
Now, in a company situation or organization situation, if you want to innovate, let's say you have competition, you're doing the same thing, delivering the same product or providing the same services as the next person. What is it, what kind of process do you follow for you to get to the point where you innovate and gain competitive advantage? Let me use what? A legal services company, a law firm, for instance. What else can you do? You sit there, you take a case from a client, and then you put the arguments together, and off you go, send affidavits through to another company or another law firm, and that's about it, isn't it? They seem to work the same way. Is there anything you can do differently in that instance, for instance?
So I have a friend who works in kind of legal innovation. And probably one of the biggest things that's happened in the legal industry over the last decade or so is the use of automatic dictation software. So now instead of having to read through all the court documents, all this kind of stuff, and then type it into a document, it's all done automatically. So you're saving yourself 2-3 hours of work, which means you can process information faster. So there's always a way to find a more innovative way of doing it. And I think it all comes down to this question that you were asking about: what is the real problem? Why is that a problem? And continuously asking this question of why. I think you have to become the annoying 3-year-old.
Let me use you, Andries, as an example, because you were responsible for innovation at Transnet. In broad terms and in summary, where did you start? How did you look? It's a big company after all, and identify the necessary talent and put the whole system together for innovation.
So I think my first step was break all the rules. And in boundaries, I mean, we were SOE, so you have to stay within boundaries, but there were certain things in place that inhibited innovation. So for first off, I started with a group of 9 people, and we literally closed down the department for 3 weeks and saying, who are we, where do we want to go, and what do we need to do differently to get there? And that's just what we did. And saying this is the community we want to be, where do we want to go? And then we challenged whether it's the way we recruit, whether the way that we train, whether the way we design. And my main philosophy was, if I get the people to be innovative, I'm okay. But I don't have to lead innovation. I just have to create an environment. So we started with recruitment, then we turned into facilities, and then we finally went to the products. But we didn't start with the products. We created an environment where people can flourish.
And you know, some of the questions I'm asking because organizations are creatures of habit, and the people they employ similarly. You come to work, you must clock in at 8 o'clock, you leave, break for lunch, 1 o'clock, come back 2 o'clock, do what you must do, and off you go in the afternoon. And that's about it every day. So can you really innovate in an environment with entrenched habits, Davis?
I think it is extremely difficult. I think that beyond the entrenched habits, it's the structures that you put in place within a work environment. So I get into the work at 8 and I leave at 6. You know, that's my habit. But there's no one forcing me to do that. So I've chosen that, and I can still innovate within that because there's flexibility. But when companies have very, very strict guidelines that says you have to do this, you have to do that, those boundaries become difficult. And that's the boundaries that you're talking about breaking. I think people have habits that they work in because you've got to pick up your kids or you want to go to the gym. And those things are easy to work around. It's when you're forced to live in a box that it's difficult to innovate. But if organizations give people the flexibility to think creatively, then it's definitely something that can be done.
Are there nations that come to mind or countries that come to mind that you say are the more innovative compared to the others?
I think you'll agree with me, but I think the Tata Group is leading innovation right now in the world. And even what they do is just to break this mold. 20% of people working on a project doesn't belong to the group. So they want to bring in new, fresh ideas, new thinking to break away from the mold of what the group has established. And I think in terms of research and innovation, they're sort of leading the pack as far as I'm concerned.
I think for me, some of the most exciting innovations are coming out of very, very resource-constrained countries. Places like Kenya, like Peru, where they don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to throw into R&D. They have almost nothing. And yet they use what they have to find really innovative ways of solving their problems. And it might not be very big innovations. They're not $50 billion companies, but they are continuously finding better ways of solving their problems with almost nothing. And those guys have the real entrepreneurial, innovative mindsets that I think are kind of world leading.
So innovation is a sort of culture of sorts that you encourage within an organization or a society, isn't it? Now, South Africa, last year, our main big issue was that of universities and funding for them. And then the concentration of everybody, the commentators, the leaders of these institutions, the politicians, and students themselves, were focused on one thing: money, 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 find more money. But obviously, there are other solutions that can be proposed and be put on the table, isn't it, to deal with this problem. How would you solve that type of, here we are, we need more money for university education. We only have so much money. How do we innovate and deal with this problem? That's a task for you, gentlemen. Solve the country's problems for me.
So when we actually had that workshop, it happened at the same time when we had to build a university, because that was sort of the thinking, there's not enough universities. But the problem boils down to is people believe if you study at a technical college skills development center, it's not that polite or going to the next level. And I think that's the first thing, is we have to ask the question, is the university actually the problem or the solution? And therefore, yes, it's expensive to study at university, but there's online training that's cheaper. There's another means of getting people to train much cheaper than to pay 50, 70,000 rand for that degree. And most often that degree doesn't give the value that you think it's going to give you. So I'm not against the whole movement, but what I'm saying is it opens up a lot of questions for, are we doing the right things, or should we just rethink the way we train people? It's not about universities, it's about skills development.
And to you,
Yeah,
David?
I agree entirely with that. I think that many of the best entrepreneurs are people who don't have a formal education. They're people who are interested in the world, and they're interested in understanding how the world works. But just because you have a degree in accounting doesn't mean that you are now a good innovator. In fact, in many instances, the kind of universities and degrees that we produce put people into boxes. I know these 8 things, and that's what I'm then going to do with my life. And I think that that's a trap. I think that the ability to say, I know some things, but I also know so many other things. How do I use all of my knowledge? And we learn so much through our family, our friends, our social circles, that there's a much wider pool of knowledge we can draw from than just university, which then begs the question, why is there such a desperate focus on companies to employ university graduates when there are many other ways for them to solve their problems?
So, to your mind, change the system entirely and adopt a new approach altogether, and that would help obviate the problem of finding funding for universities?
I think that it's a start. There are many elements to this. I mean, the universities play a hugely important role. I think that if the universities are able to deliver sort of greater commercialization and technology. So, for example, we do a lot of really interesting work from an invention point of view at universities. But the commercialization and the patent royalties that they get out of it is quite small. What happens if our universities start making more money out of their inventions and they use that to fund their operations rather than simply having to rely on government funding? So I think there are many elements that we need to look at that could solve this, but it's about changing a mindset and a culture.
Probably including producing knowledge and so forth that can be commercialized and that sort of thing. Anyway, it's an impromptu question. You can't fix it right away, this problem, but it is there. It's one of the things we should think about. And that's what innovation can do, asking the right questions, being curious, and asking why not, meaning looking for alternatives. Davis, Andries, thank you very much for having spent time with me on the program.
Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Tim.
Much appreciated. Well, that's innovation for you. And we will be talking to one of South Africa's top celebrities in a moment.